Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first episode in my series that I'm doing of reviewing every single mon in the game over time. We're starting it off strong right away with one of the strongest options because we all know the Kanto starters are great. But yeah, today we are getting right into it with Venusaur. Now, if you know anything about Venusaur, you know that it is in fact an ingredient specialist and that it is of the dozing type, as most grass types are. Just like its the other Kanto starters, it has the ingredient magnet S main skill, and it's got a solid 26.6% ingredient rate with a 46 minute and 40-second speed. Now, when it comes to frequency, base frequency, this is about on par for ingredient specialists. Actually, a lot of them, a shocking amount of them, at full evolution have a helping speed time of 46 minutes and 40 seconds. So seeing that is just pretty common. Now, having the 26.6% ingredient rate, that puts it about 5th, I believe, in terms of overall ingredient rate. But in order to take into account the ingredient rate plus the frequency, we need to do some calculations and find that it's actually one of the best in terms of how many times it procs ingredients for an ingredient spawn. It's got an inventory of 17, which is pretty standard as well for 3-stage Pokemon. Keep in mind that this does go up as they evolve. It will go up to 27 with 2 tiers of evolution, which you should be doing you should be catching a Venusaur as a Bulbasaur to make sure you don't have problems with inventory. Now, it's also got a 2.10% skill trigger rate. Doesn't really matter that much. It's an ingredient specialist. They don't care about their skill. So, moving on. Where we get to the real interesting thing with an ingredient specialist is when you talk about their ingredients list. Because if we have an ingredient specialist that has, let's say it has perfect stats, 99% ingredient rate, and a speed of 2 seconds, that'd be absurd. But let's say we had something like that, but they had 3 ingredients here that were all valued at one value. Wouldn't be worth anything despite being absolutely cracked for stats. So we gotta take into account the greater context of what's going on in the ingredient list. Now, when we look at the Venusaur, it's got honey at base as the A ingredient, tomato as the B ingredient, and potato as the C ingredient. What that's interesting is Venusaur doesn't really have that much synergy with itself. The honey and the tomatoes and honey and potatoes, they have no recipes. As far as I know, I looked through the recipes to see if I could find even one that shares these ingredients. Not one recipe, from what I saw, shares both honey and either tomatoes or potatoes. Now, tomatoes and potatoes, they do have some synergy with each other. As we know, there's Dream Eater Butter Curry, which is one of the most famous curries in the game because of how simple it can be to make with how many mons have access to tomatoes and potatoes. But that's the exact problem. There are lots of mons that can do tomatoes and potatoes at the same time, but not as many that can do honey. And those other ones are better at doing tomatoes and potatoes since you'll always have this base honey watering down its pool. If you want that combo, I highly recommend either Victory Bell or Mr. Mime as alternatives, since the Venusaur really shouldn't be trying to do that job. We also got to consider the option of mono honey or semi-mono tomato here. Once again, plenty of mons do tomatoes, so as a Venusaur, it really just wants strictly honey. I think there's also some potential with potato as the C ingredient, since this 7 honey is kind of a weaker overall proc than what the other 2 options offer. I mean, honey is worth 103 strength each honey, while tomatoes are worth 110 and potatoes are worth 124. When you do the math, this 7 honey is the weakest of the 3. But there's something to be said about the flexibility of having solo honey, and also that honey isn't going to ever really be in a dish with the potatoes. It's just kind of, if you don't have a potato farmer and you get your Venusaur to level 60 and it has good enough stats, it can make enough honey and enough potatoes for whatever you're making, and you just get the other ingredient on the side, which you can always store in your bag for later as long as you have the inventory space. So I don't think potatoes here are that bad. Tomatoes being kind of a middling option. It's weaker than the potato proc, but it's stronger than the honey. But it doesn't really have the flexibility of being the mono honey, so I really don't see tomatoes being the play here. But if you have honey tomato and it's got great stats, maybe you do use it as a dual ingredient finder. There also is something I will say, this tomato here in the middle, you really don't want it, which is unfortunate because it is weighted to be the more common ingredient. 2 out of 3 Bulbasaurs that you find will have this tomato here, and the other 1 of 3 will have honey. But it really just doesn't do much for the Venusaur, and it's just unfortunate if you get it, especially if it's got good stats. So, yeah, it's available at Greengrass Island and Lapis Lakeside. This is consistent across all tiers of evolution. And, yep, that's about all I have to say about Venusaur. It's a pretty solid Pokemon. It makes plenty of honey. If you have a good one, you'll have your honey needs all covered. I've got myself a decent one that has the honey potato, and it is absolutely cracked for making the amount of honey that I need in like 5 seconds. So, that'll be all.